Okay, we're going to get started since it's 1 o'clock and we want to stay on schedule. Thank you for coming. There still may be a couple people trickling in. Hopefully they come in that way and not front door. Welcome to everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Ben, for coming all the way from New Jersey.
Sure, yeah.
We've done that drive a few times and can be fun. Ben is the author of this book, Perpetual Chess Improvement. Came out actually November a year ago. And I encourage you all to buy it. He brought a few copies along. We also still have a few copies here. He created a podcast by the same name, or similar, the Perpetual Chess Podcast. Is that right?
That's right.
And that was in 2016. At the time of this printing, there were 5 million downloads. Now it's probably 10 or more. I don't know.
Probably not 10 yet, but
that was a year
hopefully
ago.
Hopefully not,
so
yeah, but more for
everyone
sure.
came back and watched another one.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'd say it's the first and most successful chess podcast. That's how I came across you.
Yeah, there are a few people who'd quibble about the first, but one of the first, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's the first anyone's ever heard of.
Right.
And so, yeah, 5 million downloads and streams in 100 different countries. He spent hundreds of hours, thousands probably, interviewing GMs, including Hikaru Nakamura, Vishy Anand, Ben Feingold, Alex Fishbein, who some of you may have, actually you played him here. At least a couple of you played him when he did a simul and talk. Just to name a few, Levy Rosman, he's not a GM yet, but maybe someday.
Yeah.
The book is a synthesis of those interviews.
Yeah.
I'll let you talk about it, but basically, after the talk, we'll do a little signing. If you want to purchase a book, you can purchase it directly from him. If he runs out, there's still a few more, and you can get your book signed. During that time, we'll set up for a little simul. Right now, we just have like 10. So if any of you want to play, still time to do it.
If you want to beat an NM, it's a good chance because I'm one of the weaker NMs. I'm out of form, so
yeah. Anyway, just see me. I'll add your name to the list, and I think he'll probably have more instructions about how we'll do the simul at that point. In addition to interviewing grandmasters and kind of chess celebrities, you started an adult improver series on the podcast, which I find very interesting. Deals with some of the issues of juggling time and family and still improving at chess. Welcome, you guys. And basically, I'll let you talk again, but he talks about the 4 pillars of chess improvement, and we try to do all those things right here at Hampton Chess Club and the Play More Chess Academy. I think that's all I have for an interview or for an introduction. Please join me in welcoming Ben Johnson.
Okay, well, thank you, Rod. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks to everyone for coming out. I was telling Rod briefly as I came in here. So as I'll be talking about in a few minutes, my book is, and a lot of my podcast is about chess improvement, but I also talk about chess business, chess culture, chess history, depending on who the guests are and what their particular interests are. And as someone who was a scholastic chess teacher for a long time, both in organizations in New York and running my own organizations, I know how hard it is to run a brick and mortar chess space like Rod is doing. And I'm super impressed at this facility. When I play locally in New Jersey, I have to drive. There are closer clubs, but for me to find the right competition at the right schedule, I have to drive about 45 minutes. And it's at a church where they're just able to use the space once a week. And it's a nice church. It's nice and quiet. We're the only ones there, so it's fine. But to have a facility like this, dedicated to chess is a special privilege, and it's people like Rod who make that possible. And Jordan, of course, who has been on the podcast, as we'll be discussing in time. Um, so I'll probably sit down for the presentation just to go through the slides. Um, but so going to be talking primarily about my book, which is more based on chess improvement. So we've got this position that you guys could think about for a second, and I see that Rod graciously set up a couple other positions from the book. I will say the actual chess positions are not the primary emphasis of my book. Just as my podcast, it started audio only. It started in 2016. Um, and now it's on YouTube, but it's just me and someone talking. There's no fancy graphics or anything. So it's primarily conversation and word based. And the book, as a synthesis of what's been discussed about chess improvement on the podcast, is as well. But I didn't want to make a chess book that didn't have any chess in it. So for that reason, I did select a few puzzles, either from players that I'm quoting or related to stories that I'm telling, or stuff along those lines. So this one is when I was interviewing former world champion Grandmaster Anna Muzichuk, and she made a particularly um, um, acute observation, I thought, in discussing what separates grandmasters from regular players. And as Rod said, I've done hundreds of hours of interviews at this point, so points have been raised more than once. But she put it particularly well when she said what separates grandmasters from the 2000 level players or below that is not the length of the lines we calculate, but the precision of the lines. Because when you're a serious chess player, often when you meet people, they'll ask you, like, how many moves in advance can you see? Can you play a whole game in your head, etc.? And the stronger you are, those tasks do become less challenging. But a lot of chess is more about like blocking and tackling, and hitting the ball back as you would in tennis. A lot of it is just about the minor details, and rather than like the flashy fireworks. So in this position, it's white to move, and Anna found a sequence that effectively ends the game, but it's not a lot of moves, but it's hard to see. So I'm going to leave that there as a teaser, and we'll come back to it. So a bit more about me. As Rod said, I'm a USCF master. I made master when I was 18 in 1995. And back then, there weren't as many USCF masters. I started chess when I was 12. So chess, I see there's a couple kids in here, and we'll be coming to the topic of how kids learn as compared to how adults learn. But I primarily didn't learn in a regimented manner. I was enveloped in a chess culture. I went to a school that won a national championship called Masterman in Philadelphia. Two of my best friends in the world are Jennifer Shahade, two-time U.S. women's champion, and her brother Greg, who's an international master. Their father, Mike, was a 2400 USCF FIDE master, and helped show me the chess culture and give me some lessons as well. So we all went to that school, and I was able to learn and improve. We also had a very good chess club teacher, but I was able to improve relatively effortlessly by just being surrounded by chess. And I think for kids, that's all you have to do. Love chess, do a lot, do what you enjoy, and it tends to work out for the most part. Talent does come into play, as well as like how much time you're able to put in. But what I learned in the course of doing this podcast is that as you get older, you need to be more purposeful, and often just being around chess isn't enough if you're actually trying to get better. You need to be very directed, and we'll return to that. But just a little bit more about my bio. As Rod said, I live in central New Jersey. I have two kids who are 8 and 11. Unfortunately, they're not into chess as of now. That could change at any point. I taught in a couple organizations in New York some time ago. I was then a professional poker player for a while. Actually, a lot of chess players got into poker in the early 2000s, and I was an early adopter and was pretty successful at that. I played professionally for 7 years, traded stocks for a while, and then came back to the chess world with energy in 2016. I'm a big sports fan. I enjoy running and reading even non-chess books, and that's the extent of the non-chess talk. So Rod covered most of this stuff about perpetual chess. Lucky enough to interview people like Judith Polgar, but I also enjoy interviewing the creators like Agan Mater and Levi Rosman, etc. So the book. So as he said, the book is my attempt to synthesize all of the chess improvement advice that's been given in these hundreds of hours of interviews. Because it can be overwhelming, and sometimes it's quite common, actually, that one guest will give one bit of advice, and then another guest will say the exact opposite thing. And so there's certain recurring sort of debates that occur, even though they're kind of under the surface, because they're not explicitly arguing with each other. But some person from one generation may think that playing speed chess, former world champion Botvinnik was famously dismissive of playing speed chess, whereas the younger generation, someone like Nakamura, and obviously the people who've come after him, they just play online constantly and are able to just learn naturally from playing. And so stuff like the old received wisdom that you shouldn't spend all your time playing speed chess is like a recurring debate. That one I think it's been settled, as I say in the book. And I think the war is over, as I write, and the speed chess advocates have won. But other debates, I think there's still a lot of room. There's still a lot of nuance in terms of knowing what's right and what's not. But I did come upon 4 things that I think that basically everyone I interview agrees on. And we'll be getting into what those are. But just to give a brief overview, they're doing some sort of solving of exercises, probably tactics, playing serious games, ideally tournament games, reviewing those games. But then the 4th point that I wanted to highlight, getting back to where we are today, is finding a community. Because I felt like that's something that doesn't necessarily always get mentioned, or at least not explicitly mentioned. But getting better at chess is so hard that if you don't have people supporting you, you're gonna burn out, basically, and you're gonna run out of. You're not going to be able to sustain the energy that you had. And chess, we're lucky that we're living in a great time for chess. Stuff like Queen's Gambit and Chess.com have really accelerated the game's popularity. But at the same time, like, my wife doesn't care how I do at a chess tournament. She cares about my mental health. So if I do so badly that it's impacting my mental health, she would care about that. But other than that, she doesn't care. It's kind of like telling people about like your fantasy sports team or something. If they don't, if they're not into it, people are just like, whatever. So for that reason, you need to find people that, even if they don't care about your personal results, another chess player, they at least can empathize with. I played this 5-hour game. I was playing flawlessly, and then I played the most idiotic move in the history of the world. Like, there was this unfortunate incident with Christopher Yu, who's one of the best young players in the United States. I actually interviewed him when he was 12 years old, but now he's like knocking on the door of 2,700. And he was playing in the U.S. Championship, and he played a great game against Fabiano Caruana in the most recent U.S. Championship. And then he blundered and he lost control of his emotions. And it actually became a pretty unfortunate story where he ended up, first of all, he like ripped up his score sheet in frustration, which you shouldn't do, but is not the end of the world. But then he actually physically struck one of the videographers from the tournament. Some of you may have heard this story, and was kicked out of the tournament in the middle of the tournament. So that just illustrates the level of the emotional strain the game can have, and why it's so important to have a good infrastructure, a good community in place to help support you. And obviously, Christopher Yu's been very apologetic, as has his family. And he does have a great support network. Actually, his dad was on the interview, and his dad has a very good reputation within the chess community. But that just shows how hard it can be, and why it's important to have people that really know what it's like to go through the ups and downs. So those are the four pillars, and we'll be getting into those. But then also all the raging debates, like how important are openings depending on your level. And if you guys have specific questions about a specific aspect, we'll be doing some Q&A. I'll be sure to leave time for that. But openings, end games, blindfold visualization, this thing called the Woodpecker method, which is a method of spaced repetition, kind of similar to like Duolingo for languages, where you repeat patterns over and over as a supposed method of improving your tactics more than just solving different puzzles. Studying the classics, which used to be something that, like, any Soviet trainer would say, oh, you have to do that. But now there are grandmasters who've never seen a game by like Capablanca or something, because they came up with the younger generation. They just played online and they just learned from their own games. And if you look at the staggering success of these neural networks, like AlphaZero, the Google-owned computer that taught itself to play, was only given the rules of chess and learned to play by playing against itself. Like, it didn't study the classics, and it became better than Magnus Carlsen. It created the classics. So that's another debate where it's like, we used to think one thing, but things have progressed. The third part of the book is about improving at chess away from the board. It talks about basically how to manage your energy during tournaments, how to develop study routines, the importance of physical fitness. There's a lot more that goes into it, and one of the things I point out is when I was coming up in the 90s, like, you saw a lot of, there were literal smoke-filled rooms where people played, and people hanging out gambling in the Skittles rooms all night, overnight. And then just, you would see sometimes grandmasters like running to get drinks in between, like in the middle of their games, and bringing them to the table while they played. And you don't see any of that now. It's all like super professionalized. And I feel like even at the amateur level, you got people meditating in order to maximize their clarity and focus in a game. So a lot of it is just about how you have to define what your goals are if you're pursuing chess as a hobby, and decide, how serious do I really want to take this? Because, like, for me, if I go to a chess tournament, and any working adult and even families who are taking their kids, you're giving up a lot. You're giving up your free time, you're spending a lot of money, and you have to think, it's a very personal decision, the balance you want to strike between, like, I really want those 6 rating points versus I actually want to enjoy this time. So these are not easy questions. And then the fourth part is about tools of improvement, basically about, like, an overview and how to use ChessBase, how to use engines, the chess sites, Lichess and chess.com, and what some of the most helpful features are for those, and a few other things as well that we may or may not get to. We'll see. We're going to talk mainly about the 4 pillars today. And then again, if you have questions about anything related to the podcast or anything else, or any particular thing I've mentioned, please let me know. But before we do that, let's hear from the kids. So what's your name?
Angelo.
Angelo, how'd you get into chess?
I started playing with my grandpa.
Okay.
I got better and better every time I played it.
See, Angelo has it easy. But that's great to hear, Angelo. Yeah. And how long have you been playing now?
Either 1 year or 2 years.
Okay, great. Yeah, and for kids, my advice, again, it's a little bit different. It's just enjoy yourself, put as much into it as you can. If you're becoming, like, one of the top ranked players in your age group in the country or something like that, the advice can get more serious, and it can certainly change. But for the most part, chess is just a great framework for kids to use to learn how to make decisions. So getting to the 4 pillars of chess improvement, number 1 is quoting I am John Donaldson, who's one of my favorite people to interview, because he was a very strong player. He didn't quite make grandmaster, but used to be over 2,600 USCF. And then he's a trainer, and he's also a huge chess historian. He has an incredible memory of, like, not just all the top players in the world, but like the whole American chess scene. If you ask him about some master from like the 1980s, there's a good chance he'll, like, not only remember him, but remember games that he's played. But John's advice was you've got to play, which is underrated advice, I think, especially in the online age. And again, this is something where with kids, I think there might be more wiggle room. Like Hikaru, he played a ton of tournaments. He's about 10 years younger than me. But when I was most active playing the continental chess tournaments all over the East Coast, I remember when his older brother Asaka, who was also a prodigy, first came on the scene and was one of the top players for his age group. And then this even younger, littler kid, Hikaru, came, and they were at every tournament. So even though Hikaru famously learned somewhat effortlessly, he played a ton of tournaments. He played a ton online. And also, of course, his dad is FIDE Master, or stepdad, excuse me, is FIDE Master Sunil Weeramantre, who runs a lot of programs around White Plains, New York, and is one of the most accomplished chess coaches in the world. So even though he always in his interviews says I didn't study that much, he was historical talent was and is, and was uniquely positioned to just sort of learn chess through osmosis, which we'll also be discussing vis-a-vis Bobby Fischer in a little bit. But you guys are lucky if you live near here because it's probably not too hard for you to play serious games. But I do make room in the book for people who live, outside of city centers or where there's no club. If you can find a way to play online and treat it seriously, the main thing is for the game to feel like it matters. I mean, I delve into the neuroscience a little bit in the third part of the book about sort of what makes you able to make a new memory, and the changes in your brain that make neuroplasticity decrease as you get older require that in order to have an actual learning experience, basically it's an error that triggers the learning experience, and it has to feel consequential. So if you're just playing some mindless game, in the bathroom on your phone and you make a mistake, it's probably not going to bother you enough that your brain will learn from it. At least not once you're an adult. So the importance of play is one of the major themes of the four pillars. Is that okay? And then there's so many exemplars, Jordan, of course, being one of them. So a little bit of history of the podcast. When I started it, I wasn't particularly interested in chess improvement. I had two little kids at home, so I would compete when I could, but I wasn't putting in extra hours beyond that. And I was interested in interviewing grandmasters and hearing people's stories more than anything else. And I'm still interested in hearing people's stories, but it was through feedback from listeners that I learned that people are really interested in like what they should be doing to get better at chess. And curiously enough, I mean, this was around 2016, 2017. There weren't that many resources about like what should I be doing. There were books like about the hedgehog and about middle game strategy, but there weren't books or discussion about like how to spend your time, or here's an exemplar of a working adult who managed to make a big breakthrough. And I'll show you, Philemon, this gentleman's rating graph in a second, but just to give you an overview. So similar to us here, he's from Rochester, New York, which is not a chess hotbed, but he does have an active local club that allows him to play a ton. He admits that he has a somewhat addictive relationship to chess, but so what he does is he plays intensely, and then if he feels like it's getting to be too much, he'll take a break, like weeks, months, whatever it may be, and then he'll come back and do it again. He finally had a breakthrough when he started to focus on physical fitness in addition to chess, which is a common theme among the people that I interview, not just the professionals. I mean, you see it at the top level now with how fit people like Magnus, and even Caruana is very skinny, but he also places a big emphasis on stamina and physical training. And Philemon is, bench presses some huge amount, etc. He's like a legit weightlifter. And here's his rating graph. And I love rating graphs, even though mine is not as pretty anymore. But I always feel like they tell such intense stories of the ups and downs of anyone's chess pursuit. And Philemon, I mean, it was a 12 to 13 year journey for him to earn the USCF master title. And you can just see all the squiggles. You can see that he's playing. I mean, as he said, he does take breaks like right there. But for the most part, he's just playing constantly. And it's not, he managed not to have a lot of big going down periods, but there certainly are a lot of plateaus, which is not unusual at all. But I love looking at graphs like these. And one other point I wanted to highlight, because I actually, just when I was pulling this up, because I have his rating graph in the book, but in order to make the screenshot for this presentation, I wanted to get an updated one. And it's quite common that even these people, and these are the outliers. I always want to point out to people that anyone I interview, I also interview people who are just stuck and don't go anywhere. Probably not as often as I should, because it's a very common experience. But often with the people that I interview, they had some big breakthrough, but then it's back to the squiggly, flat line, basically. And, since I interviewed Philemon, and I think it was 2022, he reached USCF Master, and obviously that had been something that had been driving him for over a decade. And then he had a couple bad tournaments, and now he hasn't played, since early this year. And it's very common, especially if you had a big goal, for once you do reach it, to just sort of run out of energy and need to step back for a bit, because getting better can demand so much. But there have been so many inspiring stories of people who managed to make gains. But I also, as I say in the book, that's not how we should measure ourselves by any means, because again, these are the outliers. The most common thing for adults is if you reach a certain rating, especially the higher you go and you're over the age of 30, you're almost never going to gain more than 200 points from there. And especially now, with the way that kids, sorry, what was your name again?
Angelo.
The kids like Angelo are improving. Like, if you can stay still, if you can maintain the rating you had, that's an achievement in itself. So chapter 2 is about analyzing your games. One of my favorite stories, Ben Feingold is a good friend of mine. He actually, when I started the podcast, basically, like Rod said, there weren't a lot of chess podcasts. There were one or two that were making content sporadically, but there was no chess interview podcast. And when I was thinking about doing it, I was as a USCF master, I'm a pretty good player, but I sort of felt like it should be like a grandmaster doing it. But Ben Feingold is someone I've known for 20 years. I had my friendship with the Shahadis. There's a German grandmaster named Jan Gustafsson, who's one of the top opening theoreticians in the world. And through the Shahadis, I've been friends with him for a long time. So when I was starting the podcast, I realized I knew some pretty prominent people in the chess world. And Ben is someone who, I lived in Brooklyn. I graduated college in 1999, lived in New York for most of the next 12 years. But there was a period there in the early 2000s where Ben lived in Brooklyn, and we spent a decent amount of time together. And he was a character then as he is now. So his famous postmortem story, and I'm sorry that I don't have the audio because he tells it better than I do. But how many of you think you've heard this story, first of all? Okay, I'll keep it, it's less, only a handful. So I'll tell you the most abridged version that I can. But basically, he lived in Europe in order to improve at chess. This is another thing that's changed. Feingold was one of the best players in the US when he was an up-and-coming player. But in those days, there weren't many opportunities for American players, especially to earn titles. So it was pretty common to go live in Europe. And I think Feingold was living in Belgium, but he also was covering tournaments for Chess Life magazine. So he went to this tournament where Kasparov played Karpov. And just as a chess fan, and as this is pre-YouTube, so if you wanted to see like Kasparov talking about chess in those days, see how they think and see how they analyze, you couldn't just fire up YouTube or like buy a Chessable course and get access to the thoughts of the best players in the world. This was like a once in a lifetime opportunity. So he saw that the game was almost over and he wanted to be able to watch them analyze, but there's 100 other people there having the same thought. But Ben had the foresight to think about, okay, well, where are they going to go to look at the game? It's a long-standing tradition that unfortunately I also write about that is dying a little bit, to analyze games, do postmortems as they call them after the game. So there were two what they call Skittles rooms where they could go to look. So what Ben did is he went and he knocked over all the chess sets and knocked over the chairs in one of the rooms. And then in the other room, he knocked over all but two of the chess sets. And sat down next to the chess sets there. So then they came in a few minutes later and sat down right next to him. And he said like 100 people followed to watch the postmortem. So Ben then had a ringside seat to watch Kasparov and Karpov analyze the game. So getting back to why there's not a lot of chess in my book, that's one of the positions that I put in the book. But really, but it's not like there's no punchy tactic. It's like, 227.50, this is 27.50 then, they'd be 2800s now playing. So it was a tough game to shoehorn in, but I did want to show it just to add to the story. And Ben Feingold has like a video going over the game online. But basically, I think it was Kasparov lost that game in the opening. So with postmortems, I'm going to try to speed up a little bit, but someone like Grandmaster Jesse Cry, who's part of a learning cohort called the Chess Dojo, he's adamant, and this again shows how chess learning changes. He's adamant that, well, I'll just read the quote. What I knew from an early age was that I had to get a notebook, really write out my thoughts and the variations that were happening in a game, and I had to do it with some depth. If you just play blitz or do the same old things, you're going to spin around the same circles and your ideas are going to become stale, and you're going to make the same mistakes. It's only when you realize the dynamic sources within your own positions, that you're going to have to rethink and renew your sense of the depth of the beauty of the game. So Jesse's famous for like notebook after notebook of like 10 pages per game of his thoughts. And, when they started their learning cohort, they wanted to emphasize postmortems, but they've made concessions to the digital age. So he's come around to, it's okay to use engines, and it's okay to do it in like a Lichess study or something like that. But it's still very important to learn from your own mistakes. Okay, so returning to the Anna Muzichuk puzzle, although this is the one that's right there, which we can also talk about. But let's go to the Anna Muzichuk one first. Okay, I didn't even have to toggle what's showing. Okay, does anyone have any guesses what white did here? Yes.
Oh, let him go first.
Okay.
Bishop X F5.
Okay, and what if they take your, whoops. Oh, sorry. This is, okay, Bishop X F5, and what if they take your bishop?
Take with the queen.
Okay, so how many points, if we take and they take and we, whoops, and we take and they take, who has come out ahead?
That.
Yeah.
By 3.
So you gave them a Christmas present. So yeah, that's an interesting idea, but maybe not the best execution. So what were you going to say?
Rook G1.
Okay, so Rook G1 is a fairly natural move, and probably if she didn't have the tactic she had, I'm guessing that would be one of the best choices. But there is a tactic here, and in the interest of time, unless anyone else has a guess, well, I'll say that it is Bishop F5. But after Queen takes, and actually I think I accidentally played it a second ago, White played something shocking here. Yes.
It's either Rook D7 or Rook D6.
Okay, very good. Yeah, she played this amazing move, Rook D7. So she leaves her queen, they say en prise, which is French for in take, with the amazing point that it's actually going to be checkmate if you take the queen. So you've given up a piece so far, but because you're attacking both G7 and the bishop on F7, the piece can't be taken. So if black, just to show, if black were to take the queen, now we play rook takes pawn check. The king has to move to the corner. And now we have mate in 2. Anyone see the mate in 2? Yes. Yeah, rook G6, and black has no choice but to feudally interpose with the F8 rook, and then it's going to be bishop F6 mate. So again, this is not like a super lengthy combination that Anna saw, but your brain has to be wired in a way where you look at a move where you leave your queen hanging. And unless you've done a ton of calculation exercises, endgame studies, stuff like that, it can be hard to think that way. And actually, I found this position coming at it backwards. I had the quote from Anna of like how grandmasters think wider than regular players, but I didn't have an example. So as I go to the chess-based database, I'm like, okay, Anna, you say that grandmasters see wider, but let's see if there are examples in your game. And then when I found this one, I was like, okay, she might have been thinking of this when she told that story, because again, it's not a long combination, but it's one that, like, I'm a master level player, and I could spend 25 minutes, and it's one of those many positions where if you look at the move, you'll probably see it. But if you never, you could easily never consider the move, and that's why these computers are so good. Charles Hertan, who I recently interviewed, FM from New England, calls it computer eyes. He says humans need to develop computer eyes where they look at every forcing move, because it's so easy with our natural biases to just ignore a move like one that leaves your queen hanging. Okay, returning to the non-chess. Well, actually, so because this position is accidentally here and here, this is a very famous position. How many of you have seen this one, white to move here? Yeah, so this one made very famous in online circles, and I actually don't have the chess-based PGN pulled up. So I'll just quickly show. This is a guy who beat Magnus, Supi. Brazilian Grandmaster, 25, 2600, far from world class, but he just played this legendary move to beat Magnus online. And I think I just threw it in just because it's so cool. Like, I think I had it in my Blitz, or no, my online play or Blitz chapter. It wasn't that related to what I was writing about. But this amazing move, Queen C6, just ends the game on the spot, because it covers the D7 square. And even if black plays pawn takes queen, white plays pawn takes pawn, there's no way out of the mating net. So another amazing example of computer eyes that I couldn't resist putting in the tournament. Okay, so let's speed up and get to questions and then see how we're doing. So pillar 4 is about community. Quick preview of one of my favorite chess photos of all time. So this one I tried to get in the book, but so this is a famous photo from the New York Times. That's Andy Soltis on the right, who's a famous New York-based grandmaster, and he's written tons and tons of books. He's written good books about chess improvement, but he's also a very observant chess historian who's written about like Soviet chess history. One of my favorite people to interview. But I love this evocative photo of him playing Fischer in, I think it was the Manhattan Chess Club Championship, in 1971. So I got to ask him about that when I interviewed him. But I wanted in the chapter about community to include this this photo. I mean, my book was published with New in Chess, but so I didn't know how photo clearances worked, and I didn't really want to go through, all the channels of like emailing the editor at New in Chess and then having them, go to the New York Times. So I found the photo from the New York Times, and it had a thing about licensing. So I emailed them directly and found out how much it would have been to include in the book. Any guesses how much it would have been to include in the book? 1.5 million. It actually is not that much money. I could have done it. But it was $300, and I decided not to ask the publisher and not to pay for it myself. But actually pretty reasonable. Okay, but I didn't include it. Okay, so community, getting back to the story about Bobby Fischer and how I was talking about Hikaru earlier, how he was uniquely positioned. I also tell the stories of Vishy Anand and Magnus Carlsen, because both of them came from what I call chess cold beds. I mean, Norway, Magnus just basically sprung out of nowhere, except there was just a couple tiny factors that enabled him to become one of the greatest players of all time. And one of them was that the first Norwegian grandmaster, Simen Agdestein, had just opened a chess institute. So once Magnus's talent was kind of discovered, he amazingly was able to like not go to a regular school and to go to this place where he could just hang out and do chess all the time. And actually, getting back to where we were saying about how kids learn, Seaman, who I've also gotten to interview, he's got a very unstructured approach to chess training, even though he's one of the top trainers in the world. Magnus, more than like solving a lot of puzzles or doing anything rigorous, Magnus just said that Seaman had an amazing chess library, and the greatest resource was Seaman would let him take whatever book he wanted. And Magnus, of course, famously has like an incredible photographic memory. So once he had access to these resources, he was kind of off to the races on his own. But he couldn't have done it without like a great family support. His dad is about a 2000 player who sort of knew the lay of the land, and without Seaman Agnesi's school, he probably couldn't have reached the heights he had. Similarly, Anand, chess was not popular at all when he discovered it. There was only 1 or 2 chess clubs in India when he got into chess, but one of them was in Chennai, where he grew up. And his sister, they wrote about it in his biography, Mind Master, which is a good book, worth reading. His sister just happened to walk by it and come home and then tell Anand, oh, there's this chess club, you should go. And so then he started going, and before you knew it, he was beating everyone. But if it weren't for that moment of happenstance, and for the fact that one of the only chess clubs in India, and there were no grandmasters in India at that time, but one of the only IMs in India happened to be at that club, that enabled Anand to spawn this generation that's currently taking over the chess world. So it's these tiny things, but without community at the top level, that's the only way you become world class. But again, I'm also talking in the book about the amateur level, and the fact that in order to sustain our own interests, we need to find people who also love chess, which luckily isn't that hard. So I might do a little plug for my Chessable course in a second, but first, let's get to Q&A if anyone has any questions about, again, anything chess related. Go ahead, Rob.
You're on. Question, and I can't remember if it was on one of your podcasts or not, but there was this idea that what separates grandmasters from the rest of us is that they spend more time falsifying their, hope chess. And I feel like, if you're a naturally optimistic person by nature, you tend to want to play hope chess. See your moves and not pay enough attention to the downside.
Yeah. So there's this book, Think Like a Super Grandmaster by Michael Adams. And I interviewed him, and that was one of their big, and that book has a very unique approach. It's a puzzle book, but what they did is they had like 12 different players all solve the same puzzles. And then all the way up to the super grandmaster level, all the way up to Grandmaster Mickey Adams, who's, like 10-time British champion and has been top 5 player in the world. And you can compare their thought processes. And as Rod said, one of their big conclusions, and you can see it for yourself when you read the book, is like amateur level players do tend to have these sort of blinders. They see a move that looks appealing and they're kind of drawn in and kind of don't look for ways to falsify, as you would with the scientific method, ways to disprove what they're seeing, whereas grandmasters are much better about being even-handed and spotting their opponent's resources as well as their own, which actually gets to the quick plug for my Chessable course, which I can't sign because it's digital, but it's about how to identify critical moments in chess. And I actually did want to show one more puzzle if there's time. So basically, it's about my own chess playing. I've been similar to Philemon, I've been on a hiatus lately. I haven't played since June in tournaments. But basically, my rating graph it goes up and then it goes slowly down like that. And then it goes as a squiggle, squiggle, squiggle. And then it went down some more, but it's finally gone up a little bit. So, and it's because I made some changes to play more practically and to play faster. And I call it identifying critical moments, about when to speed up and when to slow down within a game. And I identified some markers that, and this course is not for like, it's not for like 2000 level players, really. It's more like 1000 to 1600. But in poker and basketball, there's this thing called fancy move or fancy play syndrome, where people are drawn to, like, if someone, you could have like a 2-on-1 fast break. This could be in soccer too, where like instead of making the textbook good pass, you try to throw it behind your back or something like that. And if you're watching the sports and you're upset, it's upsetting when they do something fancy that doesn't work out. In poker, often people are drawn to try to bluff people who never fold, stuff like that. But in chess, I refer to it as when you're drawn to these moves that look cool but aren't necessarily good. Often it can be a sacrifice or it can be counterattacking. Most commonly, it's counterattacking when you could just move a piece that's attacked. So this position, I'm going to try to quickly switch to chess space, is from two world champions playing. I believe it was Orway and, got to double check it now, Orway and Emmanuel Lasker. And Black had just played Bishop A5, which I will reload in a second. Here we go. Bishop A5. So the typical fancy move. Your knight on C4 is being attacked, but instead of moving it away, you say, oh, I'll attack his knight. Now, if he takes my knight, I'll take his. Well, this was a mistake, and hopefully you're not peeking at the notation while I hide it. And does anyone see why this was an atypical mistake for a player of Orway's caliber? It's not like a super deep refutation. Yes.
Pawn before.
Okay, and what happens if bishop takes pawn? What's that? And then if bishop takes knight? You're on the right track, though. What else could we do here? Yes. Very good, knight c2. So he played this fancy move attacking the knight, but he overlooked this basic two-move tactic where by sacrificing the pawn, shielding the knight, so after b4, Black has two pieces under attack. You can't undo what you've done now. So you take, and after knight c2, now the knight is no longer being attacked, but Black still has, whoops, I'm so terrible with the arrows. That's the most amazing thing about Hikaru, is his arrow game. Anyway, pretend that these lit up. The bishop and the knight on c4 are under attack. So that's fancy move syndrome. And actually, that one isn't in my Chessable course because someone sent it to me after they'd read my course. They're like, oh, here's an example from World Champions. I'm like, oh, I should have thought of that. But anyway, any other questions? Okay, should I? I mean, I have more, but I think we're.
Yeah, I mean, there's no more questions?
Go ahead.
What do you think? So I used to play poker, I would say, as a side hustle. I was not a professional by any means.
Okay.
What would you say are the two biggest parallels between learning poker and learning chess?
The biggest parallel by far is you have to be self-critical to get better at both. I mean, and that's something coming up when I saw poker exploding. And again, like my friends like Greg Shahade and I had a bunch of chess friends that all became poker professionals for a while. That's something that's naturally ingrained. If you've become a good chess player, you know you make mistakes all the time. Everything you do is not brilliant. You know, that's just table stakes for chess. But in poker, especially if you're like young, getting into it, there's a natural inclination to think that everything you do is brilliant. And the hard thing about poker compared to chess is obviously the variance. You know, you don't always control the outcome of what happens, whereas chess, theoretically, I mean, there could be some luck involved in what openings, but theoretically you do. So in poker, it's easy to delude yourself. But the people who advance in both games are very honest with themselves. Another parallel, I mean, especially competitive tournament poker, and you do notice like Dan Smith is one of the best tournament poker players in the world, who grew up in New Jersey and made it to about 2150. He actually quit chess for poker at 15, even before it was legal. And but the stamina that you need in a tournament, both in poker where you're playing these 12-hour days, like playing these online. I mean, playing tournament chess is a great for laying that groundwork as well. And when I played, I one of my strengths as a player, I didn't feel like I had, similar to chess actually, I didn't feel like I had immense natural talent, but I had a very high floor, so I could play for a long time. And you would see people just, especially late in tournaments when there's a lot of money on the line, you would see people just basically self-destruct. And with chess players, I think that's less common. Hikaru actually got into poker for a while, and when I interviewed him in 2016, it came up a little bit. But funny enough, when he was a kid, he was known as like a hothead. I mean, those stories are still out there today. But he didn't take, and there was a period where he was, he was already. I wasn't that involved in chess at the time, but he was already obviously a household name in the chess world. And there was a period where he was bugging my friends with like poker questions all the time, just like messaging them on Facebook and stuff. But he ultimately realized that he didn't have the right psychological disposition for poker because, first of all, he's so talented at chess that it was hard for him to sort of start from the ground up in another game. But also, you do need a kind of stoic demeanor. Magnus obviously has dabbled in poker a little bit here and there too, and he seems to have more of the poker player's demeanor. You had a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
What is your favorite opening for chess?
Okay, I love the Sicilian defense. I mean, there's a million Sicilian defenses, so it's kind of like cheating. But I've actually played a few of them. I played the Accelerated Dragon when I was a kid, like you. Do you know what that opening is?
Sicilian defense, and then you push the b3, the pawn to b3, and then put the c1 bishop to c2.
Good. Yeah, you're reversing the colors, but yeah, you fianchetto the kingside bishop. Very good. So yeah, and then later I started playing the Sveshnikov Sicilian. Now I more play. I often play the. If some of you play me in the simul, you may see this, the hyper accelerated dragon, which Jordan's coach Grandmaster Eugene Perelstein has advanced the theory on a lot. Does he have you playing that, Jordan?
I play a little bit.
Okay. It's a good surprise weapon, less so than a main one. But anyway, I love all kinds of Sicilians because E4 obviously is the first move you see the most when you're coming up, and I like the imbalances that you get as opposed to like the double king pawn openings. The fried liver, yeah, the fried liver is fun too. You got to know it though. Do you have it all memorized?
I think it's E4, then they would play that, and then no, I usually start with the bishop.
Oh, okay.
Thinking there would be it is gonna be the scholars mate.
Ah.
So they would probably like move something like
probably
knight f6.
Okay.
Usually, and then I just move the knight to f3.
Okay, yeah. So the fried liver, as I know it best, I've actually, some of these double king pawn openings, I started playing the Sicilian so early that I don't know all the names. But like some people call this the fried liver against the knight g5 against the two knights. But then there's also other early knight g5s. But anyway, we're getting deep into the weeds, yes.
So I have a question. You said you did a lot of interviews.
Yeah.
A lot of people get to a point where they just stop improving. What advice do you have for those people that have just...
Yeah, that's in the book too. I feel like, so FM Peter Giannatos, who runs the Chess Center down in Charlotte, he made a big jump in his 20s. He went from about 2150 all the way up to 2400 USCF, which is pretty unusual. And I quote him, his main advice is just change something. Like whatever it is you're doing, obviously it's not working. So whether it be getting a coach, that's another thing I talk about in the book, finding a new coach, changing your opening repertoire, changing your emphasis of what you're studying, changing the time control you play. I mean, you've just got to tweak things. But obviously, overall, my sort of big picture that I forgot to mention, game analysis advice is, don't get trapped in the weeds of like, oh, I made this blunder, I'm such an idiot, on to the next game. Why are you an idiot? Like, were you tired? Did you overlook a certain type of move? really try to look for recurring patterns within your games, and whatever it is that you identify, work on that. Recently, I interviewed Grandmaster Tiger Hilar Person, who's he's accomplished grandmaster, but he's actually gotten really into Go, and he was very insightful on how to get better at chess because he started Go at 40 and has become one of the best players in Sweden, all starting after 40. And he was saying people don't like to work on their weaknesses because usually it's an aspect of the game that they don't enjoy as much. But the point he was highlighting is it's a lot easier to improve if you're starting from a lower level in whatever it might be. Like a lot of people don't like studying endgames, something like that. So he was just saying like it's paramount that you work on the weakest part of your game. Yes.
What was the best game you ever played?
I don't have any good games, unfortunately. Maybe today's the day.
All right. Well, thank you, Ben.
Sure.
Thank you very much. We have a little swag for you to take.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Awesome.
Shirt.
Excellent. I'll wear it for one of the podcasts.
Yeah, or something. And here's a mug for you.
Excellent.
And one of the things I didn't mention in the
awesome.
There's also an open there. One of the things I didn't mention in the introduction is I've benefited immensely from, well, you mentioned Chess Dojo.
Right.
But also your book recommendations that you have in your podcast.
Yeah.
If you go to his webpage, he has a list.
Yeah.
But I mean, every month seems like there's a new book that you're reviewing with someone, and I've used that to kind of between the two lists, between Chess Dojo and yours, kind of stock our inventory.
That's great.
And so those books are all available for purchase. Chess Club members at Hamden Chess Club can also check them out, like a library. Although today we're not going to check out this book. You have to purchase that. But yeah, it looks like you have a few copies.
Yeah, and I have another box if needed.
Venmo, Cash.
Yeah, Venmo, Cash, PayPal. I'm too old for Bitcoin, so I can't help you there.
Right.
Probably don't want to give it to me anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, and one thing I wanted to mention, this is kind of random, but one of these books, New in Chess, sent me my author's copies in a box like this, and I used a box cutter to open them, and one of them I made like a small crease on the back. So I felt bad because it's like I can't, and I've been selling books online, and I didn't want to sell it as undamaged goods. But on the other hand, I don't need any more of my books. So this one, the first person who asked who wants to only give me 15 for this one, it's a minimal damage. I mean, it's just a tiny little crease on the back cover. But if anyone wants me to sign this and to only pay 15, I'd be glad to have it off my bookshelf. But the rest of them are in pristine condition and are 25. But yeah, so we do books next, and then
you can purchase your book. We'll create a little line here. We'll get ready for the simul. I counted, I think we have just 9, so there's room for up to 15. If you're interested in that, just see me. I'll add your name to the list. And we'll set up a little rectangle here for the simul, and that'll probably, it depends how many, but if there's 15, it might go 2 hours.
Yeah, okay.
Right. We kind of budgeted for that.
Okay. Yeah, and I see if you already have a book, you don't have to buy it. You don't have to buy another one. Yeah.
Some people have purchased them.
Yeah.
For me, probably.
Yeah, and I don't have a pen. I don't have a pen yet. Is the other thing.
Here, let me get one right here.
Okay. And I'll write whatever you guys. If you have some embarrassing, personalized thing you want me to write, happy to write it. As long as it's PG.